I'm Dan Galusha, and welcome to another edition of Dan's Fishing Tales. It's going to be Dan's Fishing Tales Radio again. We're going to be looking back at the year 2004 season, and I've got Don Banning with me. Now, Don, as you know, any of you that have followed my Dan's Fishing Tales Facebook page, Don goes fishing with me quite a bit, mainly farm ponds and farm lakes. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about in this radio show is farm ponds, farm lakes, how to fish them, the difference between them, that sort of a thing. And again, this is the old radio show, and I'm going to be having more of these, and Don's going to be my guest on some of the others because I had Don and both Johnny Crane, too, both of them, as monthly guests, and they were usually filtered in somewhere rather along there because we had, well, show every week, and like I said, they were on there at least once a month, and sometimes together. So we're even going to have some of those. And you've already listened to some of them that I've done with Johnny, one of my favorites, where we had the raccoon story. But this one's Don Banning, and again, it's farm ponds. And Don is kind of a shoreline master fisherman, I guess you'd say. He does a lot of shoreline fishing. Oh, by the way, how you like my restrictor hat? Just got that. That's a Plano restrictor. Yeah, look back at the video I did on the restrictors. Also, I'm going to be doing one on the new Edge, and the Edge is also a stowaway box. But this restrictor, I love it, especially the terminal tackle one, but you're going to have to look at that other video to see that. Even matches my Mercury Pro Team jersey. Goes along pretty good with it. Anyway, let's listen to the radio show, and hopefully you enjoy it. I'm Dan Galusha, and welcome to another edition of Dan's Fishing Tales. In just a moment, we're going to be having Don Banning with us. We're going to be talking about farm pond fishing, something that's really popular, especially this time of the year. So stay with us, and we'll be back right after these messages. As I said, we got Don Banning with us today. Don, welcome to the show.
Good to be back again, Dan.
And as I told people last month, we're going to have you on here every month, and you're going to be a regular guest. And this time we're going to be talking about one of your favorite subjects, I know, and probably one of the most productive types of fisheries anywhere in the country. Some areas they call them pits. Some areas they call them, well, there's all sorts of names for them, but there's farm ponds and farm lakes. And the way I describe that, of course, is a farm pond is a body of water that is pretty much just a hole that somebody dug in the ground. A farm lake is one that is actually like a lake. It's a bigger area of water. It has creeks that are coming in. It's dammed up like an overall reservoir. And we've both fished both of them.
That's true, Dan. Generally, the typical farm pond will average probably between an acre and a half. And most of the ones I fished through almost 40 years of farm pond fishing have run probably under 2 acres. However, one of my favorites that I have fished for about 2 years runs about 3.5 to 4 acres. So they do vary.
Yeah, in fact, it just hit me what one of the names was that they call them. Down in Texas, they call them tanks. And I really don't know how they got that name. I have heard that they did it because they're used for feeding, or rather watering livestock, and I guess that makes sense.
I've read about them down there, and they refer to those as stock tanks, which is a term we don't use in the Midwest.
But they sure got some good fishing down there.
Some of my best bass fishing and fishing for bluegills and catfish over the many years has been in farm ponds.
Oh yeah, that's the one thing that they have, and they have pretty much every species that you find anywhere else. There's catfish, there's crappie, bluegill, sunfish of practically every variety. Of course, the sunfish, which a lot of people don't really think about, a largemouth bass, a smallmouth bass, all the things we call bass are actually in that sunfish family.
That's very true. The typical farm pond will usually include largemouth bass, bluegills, and a lot of times channel catfish. And a key to having good farm pond fishing is to maintain a good, healthy balance. A lot of times a pond will become overpopulated, the bass become stunted, and it's kind of hard to control, but an ideal pond will have so many pounds of bass and catfish per acre, or rather bluegills per acre. I can't quote you the exact figures, but if you can maintain a good balance, you'll have really excellent fishing.
And that you're right about that. It is hard to create a good balance for it, and one of the problems is both ways, overfishing or underfishing, because some people get absolutely carried away and they don't believe that they can hurt a bluegill population, but that's incorrect.
That's very true. Many fishermen don't realize that you can over what we call over harvest, take too many of any species out of a pond, and I'll tell you, the smaller the pond, the quicker this can happen. It can be very, very damaging to a particular body of water.
I know a few years ago, and a lot of folks know who Dan Salee is, Dan told me that one of the worst times that there is to overfish this is when in the winter, when they're ice fishing, because they can get right over the top of where there's a lot of fish and just absolutely hammer them. And they can wipe a bluegill population out real quick.
That's true, Dan, and with you and I both being seminar speakers, that's kind of been an ongoing mission of myself, and I think you have gone through with this too, is to try to educate people to the fact it's all right to take some fish, but you got to be reasonable about it, because over harvesting and too much fishing pressure can, like I said earlier, can ruin a pond, and it's good to reserve a pond not only for yourself but for the others that fish there too.
And one of the things it can do, and of course I've preached catch and release a lot, and the sponsors of this show, we've got some good sponsors here, and they even say practice catch and release, and especially on bass. Now people say, oh yeah, you're a bass fisherman, so you're going to say this. Part of that might be true, but also the bass is the predator. That is the balance. If you throw the predator off on his balance, he's going to throw the balance off in turn of the fish that they're feeding on. The bluegills are going to start getting out of hand and everything else. Same way like if somebody overstocks crappie. They have a tendency, they're one of the worst nest raiders there are. They will wipe a bass population out, and if they're also being over-harvested, as we said, this can really hurt everything in turn. So, as we said, a balance is key to it all.
Big thing about farm ponds, I might mention too, that probably the biggest majority of these bodies of waters are on private land, and you must get permission before fishing there. But when you first go into a farm pond after you receive permission, it's a good idea to inquire of the landowner as to the age of the pond, as to how the fishing has been. A lot of times the landowner can kind of clue you in as to what he prefers, and by all means follow his guidelines. In some cases, some ponds have too many small bass. Under those conditions, it wouldn't hurt to harvest some for the table, but oftentimes it's better to practice catch and release, and that's what I often, or most of the time, do on the ponds that I fish in, particularly for bass.
Yeah, that's, as I said, that's what I do too, and you're definitely correct to follow whatever the landowner is wanting, because after all, he owns that. And I had a gentleman a few years ago, he told me, he says, are you really going to practice catch and release? And I said, yes, I am, because he says, I've heard this out of other people, and then they don't do it. Because he said, I put $10,000 into remodeling this lake and stocking fish, and he says, those are my fish. And that, people, you have to think of that too. They're the ones that own it, they're the ones that's maintaining it, and if there's a way to help them out, if they've got some sort of a project that they're going to work on, and you know that you can help them out. A few years ago, a friend of mine, Ralph Lambrick, who has fished a lot of farm ponds out there, he was a realtor around this area. Ralph used to even plant trees for people, so, and I know you've offered people the same way to help them.
That's true, Dan, and years ago I used to fish a particular farm pond, and the gentleman that owned the pond was very gracious, and I got to fish there 5 years, and the reason the fishing stopped is because the pond winter killed, and subsequently he broke the dam and let the water go. But on one or two occasions I would offer to bring him back a few catfish from the pond. He didn't have the time to fish, being he was a busy farmer. This is a good way to kind of cement relationships with the landowners.
It definitely is, and one of the things too that I want to bring up is the fact that farm ponds and farm lakes are probably one of the best teachers we have. And I don't care if you're a beginner or an experienced angler. I say that once you become more experienced, search out the farm lakes, as I call them, because then you're going to learn more and more about not just the technique of using a lure, but also the different things that you're going to fish, such as structure. You get some of these lakes, that, like one of them that I fish, it's got 20, 30 foot of water at the depth. It's got clear water. It's got weed edges, drop-offs, creek beds, everything you can think of. And this teaches you a long way. I've done television shows telling people that even.
Like you mentioned, they're smaller versions of lakes. You know, a farm pond is just a miniaturized version of a larger lake, and there's no better place to introduce a young angler, whether it be a child or even an adult that's starting out in fishing. Farm pond is an excellent place to take these people, because they'll usually have some action, whether it be for bluegills and bass, and it helps them gain confidence as they seek to go into fishing larger bodies of water.
In fact, I usually end up taking them for bluegills in that case, because a lot of things that people don't think about, since the bass is in the sunfish family, if they fish for bluegills, they're actually getting the basics of fishing for bass, because they're going to hit lures quite similar in a lot of ways.
On the subject of lures, Dan, I found through the years that farm pond fishing, a lot of times you use what we call finesse type tactics or downsized lures. And top producer for me in the farm ponds through the years has been like a 1/8 ounce lead head jig with a curly tail grub on there, about a 2 to 3 inch grub. You're going to catch your larger sunfish. You're going to catch bluegills and catfish on these. These are baits that aren't expensive. It's a real good bait to start out on. Another one is a miniature rattle trap. The tiny traps are really good in farm ponds. Beetle spin, small spinner baits. As a rule, keep your bait small and keep your approach to the fishing small. You'd be surprised at the larger size species that you may encounter by fishing downsized tactics.
In fact, I was going to touch on that after the break, so we're going to talk a little bit more about tackle when we come back, so stay with us. Right, you already brought up the tackle, and that's what I was going to do here. And what actually would be, you were talked about the grub. One of the ones that I would say that, since we're going to talk about grubs, would be something like a Roadrunner even, because a Roadrunner combines the spinner and the grub. What would actually be your favorite lure if you were going to go after, say, bass?
Well, I use a lot of the crankbaits, relatively shallow running crankbait that runs down about 3 to 4 feet. The bandit crankbait is good, but when you encounter a pond that has a lot of vegetation, sometimes if crankbaits don't work too well because they'll have 2 treble hooks, then you can go to a lure such as the Johnson Silver Minnow. It's a spoon with a hook riding upright. You can attach a trailer to that, which we mean by a trailer is like a twin tail grub or some other attractor. Other lures that are good would be the man's little frogs or rats. They're weedless. They can slide over moss. Those are really great baits in ponds, especially in the summertime when the vegetation becomes real thick.
What I like to use too, since you're talking about vegetation, is using something like a 4-inch finesse worm, because you're going to get some action off that. Even if you get some bluegill taps, you're going to know, okay, there are fish present there. And Keith Lundahl, who used to own Lundahl Lures, came up with a very interesting idea. We were catching some fish in a lake like this, and we were getting on 4-inch Berkeley Power finesse worms. But we were getting a ton of bluegill hits, and I mean a mess of them. But wherever those bluegills hit, that's where we caught the bass. If we weren't getting the bluegill hits, we didn't get bass. Keith says, you know what I think it is? Those bluegills are coming up, looking at that worm, hitting it, and the bass are curious and wondering, well, what's those little devils after? And they come up, and then they grab the thing. And I don't know, he may have had something there.
Sounds like a good point. Another thing I like to use is topwater baits, like a popper or what they call a buzz bait. It's a spinner bait with a kind of a propeller type blade. And I'll tell you, this is really exciting fishing on farm ponds or lakes, especially when the water surface is relatively calm and you just buzz this right along the surface. The strikes that occur using this type of bait, they're just tremendous, and it makes your heart stop. It's so exciting.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun. And one of the things that I use a lot is the mini spin type things, the 1/8 ounce spinner baits. But you know, we're just running out of time. We could go on and on and on about all of this on the tackle, but another thing that relates to this are strip pits, and we don't have time to go into that. It is a little bit different on fishing a strip pit. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring Don back again next month. As I said, he's going to be here every month, and then we're going to be talking about strip pit fishing and what we're going to be looking for there. So Don, I want to thank you for being on the show with us.
It's been a pleasure, Dan.
And until next time, get out there in the water and enjoy a great day of fishing. Well, as always have a great time doing a show with Don, and we did then too. So until next time, get out on the water and have a great day of fishing.